Hello and welcome to the Peace Talk. Today I have a very special guest from Russia with me. She's a student and lives currently in Scotland. Dear Maria, thank you very much for having the time and thank you very much for following my invitation.
Yes, thank you very much for taking an interest. Yes, my name is Maria. I work at the movement of Conscientious Objectors in Russia. So our organization primarily provides legal consultation to people who want to refuse military service, participation in the army, or participation in the Russian invasion into Ukraine. So we've been working since 2014 and has been consulting people who don't want to serve in the army in times of peace, because the military service is still compulsory in Russia, although it has been reduced from 2 years onto 1 year. And when the war began, of course, we had a massive inflow of people taking interest in our work, much more people asking questions, and our audience expanded not only on the people who are engaging with the conscription services the first time, but also the people who are military personnel. So, for example, already had a contract with the military or were working in the military but want to stop because they don't want to participate in the Russian aggression against Ukraine. So yes.
Okay, very interesting. Here, my first question is, your work, your organization started in 2014?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, there's interesting records on this. As with any organization, it takes a period of time from conception of an idea onto the starting to work under the present name. So we've been kind of gathering the records, and it looks like people who founded the organization started forming it in 2013, in May of 2013, because Yelena Popova, one of our key organizers, she had to leave that organization when the movement was starting to be formed.
Okay, very interesting. And did the Russian government, did the regime ban you under the label foreign agent, or as you know, Russia did, the government did ban many, for example, the CEU University and many other NGOs. Did it happen to you, to your organization as well?
Mm-hmm. So yes, of course, there's a layer, sort of 3 tiers of labeling organizations that the Russian government doesn't like very much. The first tier is foreign agents, following by an undesirable organization, and then it's terrorist or extremist organization, such as the Democratic Movement of Vesna, is recognized organization now. It's areas to be called a state that it is recognized as a terrorist state, but that's the system that we live in. The movement of conscientious objectors was not yet claimed any of those labels, but we are expecting that it might happen at any point. Basically, the lists of foreign agents are being released every Friday, so we keep looking, and we experienced our website being blocked on the territory of Russia several times. The most recent was just in April, and the April blockage was followed by a message that our website is harmful because it propagates not going avoidance of military service and discredits the Russian military, which of course is true, but but yeah. So it might be a question of time when we will be called a foreign agent, and we have several. We already had several legal consultations with lawyers who explained us what to do when we receive such a status, and how we can protect our volunteers.
Yeah, sure. I mean, on the one hand, it's a good sign that they are fighting against you because, at the conference, I heard a nice quote. I heard it for the first time. First, they ignore us, then they laugh at us, and then they fight us. And in the end, we will win. So it's a good sign because they don't ignore you. So you are a key player, and they are afraid of you. So it's in this sense, I meant that it's a good sign that they are fighting against you because you're doing a great job. In this
I
sense, yeah,
agree.
you're
Yes, the label of foreign agents is almost like a certificate of
yeah.
quality in for Russian NGOs at the moment. But
Yeah.
uh, yeah,
Yeah. Like a badge, I did great job. Yeah.
yes, badge of honor.
Absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, it's fantastic that people like you from Russia who are fighting in Russia against the government on this conference, and so we can connect. And there I met you, and yeah, it was a great opportunity. And many people from Ukraine and Russia and Belarus and Olga, for example, were there. And yeah, so yeah, maybe we can jump to this question because yeah, it was something like emotional for me because at one point everybody danced, and then there was this almost pathetic songs of John Lennon and like the 60s, the hippie movement, and it was like the old school peace movement with John Lennon. And then and then suddenly I saw myself crying. I couldn't stop my tears because of Olga and Oleg, because it was so it was so a touching moment for me, because when they are talking about their regimes and the authoritarian government that they are facing and the problems that they're facing, and then at one point I believe Olga and Oleg held hands, and yeah, I couldn't stop crying. First I wanted to hold on my toxic masculinity, and but then I gave up. I fuck it. Let's cry.
Good.
And so yeah, it was a mixed feeling. And yeah, with some of the speakers I do not fully agree, and I have some points that I could criticize. But I want to know, how did you experience the whole conference? Because many viewers maybe don't know, but in the Austrian mass media there was many articles, and even in Standard and many other Krone TV published an interview with the Ukrainian ambassador, who was also saying, okay, this is Russian, they are repeating Russian propaganda, and so on and so forth. So the conference as a whole had a very seriously was under serious pressure and under attack. The Austrian workers union, the ÖGB, canceled also the conference room. So it was not nothing, it was some serious pressure. So um, maybe you also joined it and you were part of it, so maybe you can share your experience. And what do you think went wrong? What do you think was very well? How did you feel about the organization? What was missed? And yeah, maybe you can share your opinion.
Yes, thank you. It's a very good question, because I wasn't sure what to expect from this conference when I accepted participation. I expected a place where many different NGOs share experiences, and because it is specific to the Russian invasion into Ukraine, I expected there would be a lot of sharing of information from people who are aware of the context of the Russian invasion into Ukraine. So I expected to meet a lot of organizations from Russia. And I was frankly startled at the beginning because the speakers in the very first day, one after another, were expressing anti-American, anti-NATO perspectives, uh, showing all the kind of points in history when US wasn't Russian politics and which actions of the NATO expansions could have provoked Russia into aggression. That made me very uneasy because it sounded like shifting blame from Putin, who is a dictator who does not care about the well-being of the people, who started this war because he has some imperialist ideas of power and um, conquering. Um, and for us, for Russians in the democratic movements, it is very painful to listen to views such as this because it feels like sheltering him and removing the blame from him. So of course, in the working groups, when we were separated, we were in my group speaking specifically about conscientious objection, and that calmed me down for a little bit. But the same sense I received when the working groups finished, and I talked a little bit with the participants from Russia, from Armenia, from Ukraine, from Belarus, from Georgia, and I saw them expressing the same concerns. So it became really apparent that the conference was not expressing a personal opinion about this invasion, and many of the speakers who were placed as the key, as the introductory speakers, were actually displaying a position that is harmful. But because I was overwhelmed with emotion and confusion regarding all of what I experienced in there. But having talked to the organizers, we established a few things. We understood where the miscommunication happened. So I think the main problem is that in the European peace building organizations, movements, there's a certain implicit knowledge that if the invasion into Ukraine is a crime, then Putin is a criminal and he should be judged as such, and he's definitely at fault. Because European community accepts that as a fact, they don't spell it out quite as often. And they want to move on to explore the background. They want to explore the root causes of conflict so that they could apply it in the future, understand what they need to be wary of and what they need to stop doing, basically. Which is why there were many speakers who were talking about the NATO expansion and the general trend of militarism in the global West. However, for us, it wasn't as obvious because we come from a context where we constantly have to prove the basic fact that Putin is in the wrong. And for us, it is very important to hear that position. And in fact, if we understand that those European organizations are not Putin sympathizers, experience a severe danger from being called that way. So, per se, an Austrian organization that has been called a sympathizer of Putin's regime will receive a bit of bad press. It will be discussed for a certain period of time, but there wouldn't be any impact on its function, on its supporters, on its colleagues and affiliates, because everybody in the circles understands what they stand for and understands what they mean. For us, for organizations in Russia, in Belarus, it is much, much more dangerous than that. Because if somebody claims us to be sympathizers with Putin's regime or defenders of Putin's regime, uh, that's not simply a bad press that will go away in a couple of weeks. That means losing our funding from oppositionally natured people. That means losing our supporters. That means getting denounced by the Russian oppositional media. That means more people will consider us a bad influence, and more people will be um, calling to stop our support. And essentially, that means that the people who come for us for help will stop coming for us because they will stop trusting us with their problems. And we cannot have that. Our work is very sensitive, it's very dangerous, and the people who come for consultations to us are very scared. So we cannot make any appearance that would harm the image of us being the safe organization that fights against the regime. It is very crucial for us to repeat, we do not support this war. We want to stop this war. We want the Russian military to be removed from territory of Ukraine, and we want Russian soldiers to no longer participate in this. In fact, we want to ban army in Russia altogether. This is what we stand for, and it is very important to communicate that again and again and again, so that people understand uh, what we stand for and what we believe in. Um, so, having expressed that to the conference organizers, we came at an understanding that uh, those things that are taken implicitly should instead be set out in the open. Um, I will be drafting a statement and calling for signatures from other organizations, from attendants at the conference who also felt uncomfortable with these uh, problems. Hopefully we will release it to the organizers and yes, to members of those organizations within a week. And we will keep consulting with the organizers in regards to the declaration that they will release after this event, because it is very important that the declaration does not look like it's supporting Russia's actions, like it's shifting blame from the Russian government, and like it's calling for something that we cannot endorse. That is another important thing. In fact, because throughout the conference, a big discussion and a big repetitive statement was, we need negotiations and we need immediate ceasefire. Now, those things are also easy to misinterpret if you do not explicitly state what they mean. Immediate ceasefire without explanation of, we need to remove Russia from Ukraine territory. We need to have discussion, and we need to have courts in place, and we need to judge people who are responsible. Without saying all of that, immediate ceasefire sounds like freezing the conflict and telling Ukraine, you should just give up the territories that Russia already occupied. As long as there are no more people dying, it doesn't matter what you do. Just give up Ukraine, give up, no, give up Crimea, give up Donbass, give up everything that Russia has invaded over this year. And this is unacceptable. We want to maintain the structural integrity of Ukraine. The democratic movements of Russia believe that it's impossible to negotiate with Putin because Putin does not abide by democratic principles. So negotiations and asking him politely to stop is not going to work, and we need another plan of action. And what we need to be doing is continue to support the fact that Ukraine territories belong to Ukraine, that Crimea belongs to Ukraine, and we need to remove the Russian military from those territories where they belong. So once I expressed this concern to the organizers, they understood that they weren't explicit enough in what they intend by the word ceasefire, because for them ceasefire, of course, is also not the freezing of the conflict and taking those great losses on the Ukraine's part. And for them, it's a long process of discussion and court attention and human rights fighting. So that made me feel at peace, actually. Today, I am in a much better mood because I had this conversation, and I think it was useful in the end, as much as it received negative attention and negative feelings from some of the participants. It was useful to have this conference to get into that point of understanding what needs to be said, what needs to be explicit, and what we mean by the terminology that we use. Yes. So that's my opinion. I think in the end, as much as it was difficult to listen to some of the speakers, and as much as it felt like the voice of Ukraine and the voice of all the parties involved in this war are lacking, I think it was important to have this event in order to come at a broader understanding of where Europe is at the moment, what they believe in, and what we need to perhaps educate them on or communicate to them, and what plans we need to create together. So it was still in the end very productive, I think. Yeah.
I had the same feelings, and for example, I cannot talk bad about Noam Chomsky because I love him and he's my idol and academic role model. But yeah, and in the end, he said only that, okay, we are in big danger because of nuclear war, Third World War, and so on and so forth. He didn't say much. But with Sachs, I had my problems because he was very one-sided, I believe. And on a factual base, if you look it up in history books, he's not wrong. That's the point. That's the interesting thing, because yeah, he's right about US imperialism, he's right about NATO expansion, he's right about Nicaragua, and he said he had more than 20 years of experience US regime changes all over the world. For example, they almost installed a president in Venezuela, but it didn't succeed. So we all understand it. But at the same time, you cannot frame the Maidan just as a coup. It's not a coup. It happened it turned out to be, co-opted maybe, or there was neo-Nazi involvement, and you can all say this, but it was not just a coup. It was the people wanted to overthrow the oligarch regime and the pro-Russian regime, and so you have to explain, like you said, and you pointed very good out, that you have to explain every detail for audience, especially those who are not well informed about what was going on. And for a foreigner or for a newcomer, so to speak, in this topic, it seems like they are repeating the Russian narrative, and this is dangerous. And so either you take the time and you explain the whole thing and you are more balanced, or so that's my observation about Sachs. And he's in I believe in half an hour he will talk here in the 10th district, and maybe I will attend it a little bit. We will see, and then hopefully I get the chance to ask him these difficult questions, why he's doing that, because he's the top on the top. He's a top level professor at a elite university in USA. So yeah, this is clearly a mistake. Raúl Sanchez Quedillo, a Spanish philosopher, opened my eyes and touched my soul with his book, This War Will Not End in the Ukraine, because he explained from a left perspective, from a very democratic perspective, the traps that we can fall into as a left people, as people that are democratic and that are opposing authoritarian regimes and so on and so forth. But on both sides we can fall into traps, and I observe it in my with my friends and colleagues and many other who I met. And because it is maybe from the Cold War, because every small or proxy war was determined by the big imperial powers, the Soviet Union and the USA. And so it's easy to sympathize. For example, if you sympathize with Nicaragua and then you see the US imperialism there, then you sympathize with the Soviet Union. And this is the trap. This is the key moment, to sympathize with one empire just because the other empire is cruel. So you have to criticize both empires, and at the same time, and that's I believe in this. So it's like in Bulgaria, my anarchist colleagues organized a demonstration, no to NATO and no to Putin. So it's at the same, you have to say both at the same time. And
Definitely, yes.
that was also a little bit missing in the first day, maybe because of these big names like Chomsky, like Sachs, these elite professors who already had their opinion and know the history. Maybe they are more balanced if you talk with them on a 3-hour interview. Of course he will admit that Putin is an authoritarian guy. I'm sure. I mean, I believe that Rainer Braun and many others, they are good people, and they're Democrats. So yeah, I believe it was a mistake, and
There's a limitation of the time allocated for their speech and the desire to bring up the points that are most important to you. Every time you're writing a speech, you want to, and sometimes you are getting from what type of audience. Usually how I write my speeches, I think about, who am I talking to? Do those people know what I know? Should I be explaining them something that they might not know? Are those facts too basic for them, or do they actually need to know them? So it's this kind of analysis. But there is another type of forming a speech, and that is going from the, what do I believe to be the most important idea to communicate? So sometimes when you do the speech that way, you forget about your audience. And I think Jeffrey Sachs has a lot of anger towards the US, and it's not without reason. It's true that there were a lot of proxy wars led by the US, and its militaristic involvement in other nations is very concerning. So he went from a place of wanting to communicate this idea, but he forgot about the audience. He forgot that he needs to explain to the audience that as well as this, NATO is not the only thing at fault. Because as much as NATO can provoke Putin, as much as its expansion could seem dangerous, NATO never provokes Putin for violence. NATO never forced Putin to imprison his own people, to drag his own people out of their homes onto the war zones. NATO could never force Putin to form the horrible conditions we have in our prison system and arrest people who express any sort of anti-militaristic views. We had 20,000 arrests in last year alone for people going on demonstrations. We have thousands of administrative cases where people are fined. The fines on some of the articles in the Russian law have risen 300-fold. And we have an increasing number of criminal investigations into people who simply talk the truth. They say what's happening. They talk about the bombing of Ukrainian areas. They talk about destruction of Ukrainian civilian objects. They talk about death. They talk about death of Russian soldiers. And all of that in the present Russian law is called, oh my gosh, there's this term, it keeps flying out of my head today. Sorry. This is frustrating. Okay, I will remember that term. Basically, delegitimizing the Russian military. And that's a new law under which a person can serve a real jail sentence for 3-5 years. It's a horrible situation, and there's definitely only one man to blame for all of this. And whatever NATO could have done to make Russia feel like they need to protect themselves could not have forced Putin to act in the way that he does. He is not only stealing Ukrainians' lives, he's stealing Russian people's lives. He is destroying his own nation. By waging this war, he cut out our chances for diplomacy. He cut out our chances for trade. He narrowed down our economic opportunities, and he basically destroyed the image of Russia in the international community. And it is very hard to go back from that. So earlier, you mentioned that the difficulty is in weighing one state against the other. If you sympathize with one state, you have to antagonize another. But
no,
it's
that's the
even
trap.
more complicated now, because you antagonize a specific governing structure of Russia, but you sympathize with the Russians who are fighting against that, and you feel uncertain about the people in the gray area who perhaps haven't made their position open or who support the Kremlin. And it's very complicated. It's not as simple as saying country A is wrong, country B is right. Let's support country B and be against the country A. Because within country A, there's subsections, and it's understandable why it's so difficult to comprehend this, and why it's so difficult to keep saying all of this. So I understand why you're Sachs performed the way he did because he does have a lot of things to be upset about and legitimate things, and he wasn't creating facts out of thin air, but he just wasn't clear enough about what this means in application to this invasion and what this means in application to Putin's own responsibility. And as long as we stay informed about this and as long as we remain clear about this, our organizations that participated in this conference should come at an understanding, I believe.
I absolutely agree, and yes, I'm totally on your side. As an anarchist, I have always the perspective of the ordinary people, and so I do differentiate between the state, the government, and between the ordinary people who are not involved or who are dissidents or who are against the rule that are opposed on them. And yeah, so it makes the things, like you said, more difficult because I sympathize with every Russian who is a dissident, and at the same time I'm opposing the errors that the government is doing, that the regime is doing. So yeah, it has many layers, and so for people who are not well informed, it's easier to fall in this trap. And it's not easy in the argumentation because then you come up with but the US imperialism is much more crueler, and then they invaded more countries and more deaths, and maybe on a factual level maybe this is right, but it's like not a competition which empire is the most evil one, or it's not a competition who lives under the most cruel regime, or what. I sometimes I have the feeling that US Americans are the hardest critics on the US empire, and and when I talk to Russians, they are the hardest critics on the Russian empire. And but guys, this is not on competition. You both live under an empire. Get used to it, fight it, and don't compete. But yeah, maybe I observed it wrong.
Yeah.
And what did
I
what you
agree.
said?
And it's also, I think, because people are more informed about their own context. And within Russia, we understand that the war with Ukraine is not the only war that Russia has been involved in. And if the war in the Ukraine could be attributed to multiple historical factors or diplomacy factors, this conference did not, for example, bring out the war with Chechnya. This conference did not bring out the Russian occupation of Georgian territories. Russia has always been, well, for a considerable time, Russia under Putin has been a very aggressive force that refuses to listen to reason. And recognizing that and talking about that is very important.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. Yeah, the in Moldova, Moldova, the Transnistria region, it's also very important on the border from Romania and so on and so forth. So, and they have a strong influence in Bulgaria and in Serbia as well. Especially now, I had in my working group a lady from Kosovo, and she was talking about vividly about the Russian influence in Kosovo, and yeah, and people listened to her, and they applaud even. So I believe that people were aware, but yeah, at the same time, I had also the feeling that they are more angry at the US empire than the Russian empire. And yeah, for example, there were two comments at the end of the conference. Professor Klaus Mögling, which I also interviewed, which is a former professor in retirement from the University of Kassel, political scientist, and he also wrote a petition to stop the war and negotiate. But he clearly stated that Russian troops should leave the Ukrainian territory, and also in the beginning he was saying that he is pro weapons delivery, but only in a defensive what is the right term, in a defensive manner. So only the defensive weapons he sees as legitimate. And now with nuclear threats, he said that now we should stop and we should negotiate. There are, and I had the feeling, and also I talked to him after the conference, and he said, I had a little bit stomach ache because we should add this only one sentence in this last paper, in this final declaration, that Russia's troops should leave Ukraine. And this is one sentence that should be added. And he talked to Rainer Braun, and hopefully in 2 or 4 weeks, when we meet each other again in this big Zoom conference again, maybe we can push the organizers, push all and maybe not push, but discuss it, and maybe we can bring it up. It is an important point. And then also there were, I hope I pronounced her name well, spell her name well, Loila Nordic. She's an anarchist from Russia. She was the lady in red who, I don't know if you listen to her question. She asked the question, why do we didn't see it coming, and why is Europe and Austria, especially Austria with the OMV and with the oil fossil industry, is trading with Putin and for many years and decades, and the fossil fuel industry, and why do we not attack our own corporations and our own oligarchs, so to speak. So she was right in that question, so many parts were missing. Maybe it's because of lack of time. Maybe the selection of speakers was a little bit unbalanced. So but I believe Olga and Oleg showed that there is space for criticism and debate. And Nina, I believe her name was Nina. She silenced the whole audience, because she was telling us, it's easy for you singing songs about peace, referring to Lennon's peace song, and in a warm and safe space, and but we are not in a safe space. We cannot sing songs about peace. And she was so right, and she's involved in there, and she's a refugee, and so I was like, oh my God, she's right. And I'm singing here with a lot of good people, and we are talking about geopolitics and empires and how do we solve the problem. But for me, it's comfortable to speak about it. And this was also a very touching moment for me. And
Yes, it's true. Sometimes when you are removed from context, it is much easier to philosophize about the situation, to think about the background, the international relations, the future implication of those conclusions. All of that is a prolonged conversation and a multi-layered conversation. For people who are directly involved in the situation, it is not as academic discussion. It is not a discussion of interest. It is not something we discuss because we think it is an interesting topic. It's something that we are fighting with because we live in it. We feel it every day. There is a tremendous amount of pain that even people who don't live in Russia right now, who are in the safe area, who managed to escape or not being persecuted, still experience tremendous amount of pain and anger. I can speak from my own experience that when the war began for the first half of the year, I was immobilized to do or think of anything. It was the most severe depression I've ever experienced, because not only you feel shame for your country and you feel regret and remorse for everything that's happening, but you also feel what in psychology is referred to as survival's guilt. That why am I here? Why am I safe? Why are all of those people suffering? Why is it them being in jail and them being sent to war and killed and overseeing all of this horror while I am safe? I do not, I cannot feel bad because I'm not experiencing what they're experiencing. But we still do, because we feel this pain all the time. We understand what's happening. We can feel how our nation is being stabbed into the heart, and it hurts every day. And this is something that in any discussion with international organizations, or especially international institutes, parliamentarians, boards, things like that, areas where people are much more pragmatic and objective in their thinking, we should remember this massive array of feelings, and we should be sensitive towards them. Because in fact, the reason there was so much opposition to this conference, the reasons Ukrainians went to the embassy and blocked the first venue, the reason they kept writing about the wrongs of the conference in Twitter and publishing articles, is very simple. They feel a lot of anger, and they have to express it. They live in this reality where if they think somebody is siding with an aggressor who is presently taking away their homes and killing their friends and family, those people are also the enemy and they must fight against those people. And I completely understand this thought process, because the same thing happens when I hear somebody defending Putin. Whenever somebody's saying that, oh, surely it's not all that bad, I feel tremendous rage. And
I feel you.
I don't even know how to conclude this thought because it's just
I totally,
emotions.
yeah, I totally feel you. No, I feel you. Yeah, I understand you. Yeah. Yeah, to some degree, as a scholar, as a political scientist, I have to understand what's going on. And I know that I'm not directly involved, which makes my position more comfortable, more, I have a privilege. I understand it. Nina told me, and many before her showed me that. And now you are also showing me that. And I can feel it, really. I feel it under my skin. But at the same time, as a human being, as a rational thinking man, I have to understand what's going on. I have to understand the structure. For example, you mentioned just one sentence that maybe I don't fully agree, and maybe I misunderstood you, because you said it's one man responsible for it. I do not think that Putin is alone. I believe that behind him, and you know it, and I misunderstood you, but behind him there is a oligarchic regime. Behind him, there are structures, military system, and there is a culture of aggression, of rape, of masculinity. There is a toxic, buying yachts. What is the English word of yacht? Yacht or not? Jet, this big boats, big expensive $1 million boats, whatever. And this is capitalism at its purest. This is aggressive. Yeah, this is wild capitalism, and capitalism is a structure. Capitalism has not a face, and the military system, and so on and so forth. So there are also multi layers. I love the term that you said, and the media is playing a role in Russia. So there are also a lot of people that involved in distributing this information and propaganda, because they are paying their rents, because they are profitizing, they have privileges. Gazprom, the fossil fuel industry. I mean, there is a lot of rents that the oligarch gets every year, every second. Every drop of oil is a new car. And so there is a whole system that we should draw a big picture, because I don't like the typical dehumanization of Putin is a devil. No, Putin is a rational being, and he is only playing by the rules of the game. And the games are cruel. The game is capitalism. And here I'm maybe radical, or here I'm an anarchist. And here I point the finger out to the system. This does not mean that I believe that Putin is a good guy. I do not say that. There is a difference between explaining the factors for aggression, for imperialism, explaining and legitimizing. I'm not for capitalism. I'm not for legal states and military regimes and so on and so forth. So yeah. just to mention my context and how I explain, for example, wars. And I see every state has, to some degree, a military system, an oppressive system, a police forces, violence. This is part of almost every state. And some are more violent, some are more imperialistic, and some are not. And maybe we in the West have the privilege that we don't see the exploitation as near as Russians do, or maybe because we exploit resources from Africa and we don't care about Africans. Maybe it's like this. I do not know, and maybe we go too far away from the topic, but yeah, that's just a little argument for understanding what's going on, and bringing also the system and the structure into the explanation. Maybe you disagree, I don't know.
Yes. What I can say on this point is that obviously there is a massive net of connections and responsibility on different people. So I understand what you mean about the system, and that is very much the case. None of the people who are presently performing the Russian propaganda or stealing Russian money and exploiting the resources of our country, none of them are innocent. But when I talk about Putin, I see him as a man who came accidentally, almost. Nobody expected him to last that long. It was just a successor who used this opportunity around him, the people that he's closely connected with, the people who are loyal to him. He handpicked the people who are now making this system impossible for regular Russians to live in. He handpicked the ministers. He handpicked the oligarchs. All of this exists because in one way or another, he approved it. And he did not do anything to disapprove of it. Therefore, I still see him as the main face of the Russian dictatorship. Although it's not as simple as killing him will destroy dictatorship. No, because he built a structure, he built a network, he built the system, but it is still him who did all of that. That's what I believe in. Regarding the conception of capitalism, it was interesting to hear, but if the case of conflict and militarism was only applicable to capitalism, we wouldn't have had so much exploitation and aggression and invasion in the Soviet Union. Communist regimes, capitalist regimes, social democratic regimes, ideology is not inherently connected with the level of corruption, the level of abuse, and the level of dictatorial or authoritarian power. Those things are separate. It's like a compass, political compass, where you have left, right, state involvement, liberal and authoritarian. This scale between liberal and authoritarian, it's separate from capitalism, but it plays a significant role, and it can destroy any economic system if it is on the edge of the spectrum, either one. We see extreme example of libertarianism in America, I would say, where they still cannot ban guns because they're so committed to the freedom of holding a weapon, even though people continue dying every year by the hundred because of gun violence. So extreme level of libertarianism, which is not inherently related to capitalism, but of course there is economic gain in that, within that scheme. And of course, extreme level of corruption that we experience in Russia under authoritarian regime. So it is a different scale that makes this impact. It's not necessarily communist or capitalist, left or right. It's about the decisions that the state makes in how they operate and on whether they do or do not abuse their power.
It's also a good explanation. Yes, I agree with you. Yes, you can see it on with this lens as well. Yeah. So maybe I had prepared a question that was also a nice point, because I talked to Leila. Sorry for mispronouncing it badly. Nordic, and she, like I said, is a Russian anarchist, and she said to me that she's for weapon delivery because the Ukraine, she's Russian, and because people are dying, and she argued that yeah, people should have the right to self-defend themselves, and so on and so forth. And then she said also another interesting thing, which I never thought about, because she said she's also critical, and at the same time she's critical about the sanctions, and she explained why. Because first, sanctions are hitting ordinary people and not the oligarchs, and she explained that the top oligarchs are not very touched by the sanctions, but only or did I remember it correctly? Maybe I confuse it now. Maybe she turned it around, that only the top are involved, but not the 300 richest Russians or whatever, something like that. So not all oligarchs are sanctioned. So this is also a problem, that ordinary Russians are, sanctioned and suffer from Western sanctions. I had a talk with a professor from the Central European University. He's from Hungary, And he, for example, because I said, do you feel, is it just and is it justified that Russian students who also are critical to Putin and who also are very aware of their situation and the regime, is it just that these students, just because they're Russians, are excluded from the scientific community, and that many scientific projects now are stopped and banned, and Russians need to go back to the and I feel it's unjust, because I love my scientific community, and what I feel that science is democratic, transparent, and open, and we exchange debates, arguments, we show it on the table, and then we discuss it. And this is democracy. This is everything for me. And not having, for example, one on the table is for me like a pain. And he explained to me, this was at the peace conference in Nefke in Burgenland, the biggest Austrian meeting of peace scholars. And he explained to me, yeah, but Russian academic system is monolithic, and so we have to ban them. And then I said, but I believe it's impossible to imagine that we did the same, because with US students, ban US students from Europe just because they invaded Iraq or Afghanistan. And then he said, yeah, but the US system is more pluralistic, and they have, for example, Democrats and Republicans. They are more open to other stuff. They're more critical. And here I stopped the discussion, because it was for me too one-sided, and I don't buy that every Russian university is an instrument for propaganda. I cannot judge it. Maybe you can help me out here, but I don't believe it. And I think here I see a double standard, and I think we should not punish the weak, and we should not punish the citizens and the ordinary people, in my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong here. Maybe you you criticize me. I'm not sure.
That's a very good discussion. So regarding the sanctions, it's really hard for me to estimate the impact that was made either to the oligarchs or to the general Russian public. It's difficult to estimate, because for the top half of the Russian public, we don't even know what their real income is. We don't really know what real property they own. And if we observe Europe taking away their yachts or flats and apartments, we don't know if there are any more of such things anywhere else. Perhaps they did have different bank accounts. Perhaps they offshored money in some other manner. So any impact we could observe on them is virtually impossible to estimate. I know that the sanctions were meant to punish those people, and it is really hard to discern between the people that you're punishing. For example, the easiest way to punish the rich oligarchs who travel to live abroad somewhere comfortably in Europe is, of
Oh, I
course,
would love that.
travel
As an
visas.
anti-capitalist, I would love that.
Of course, the idea is then you ban tourist visas. But what that means is that many Russians who are struggling within the system that they find themselves in and want to escape can only do that by going into their neighboring nations and purchasing a flight from there, or applying for a visa from their local embassy. They cannot get a visa into Europe. They cannot travel there and stay there. They cannot escape. Meanwhile, when there's a will, there is a way. I mean, people who manipulate Russian structures, people who have connections, people who basically own the system, they can always find a way around it. They can always find a private jet that's not recognized by anything and just fly out on some remote island. It's no one would even know about this. Then what else? We can experience sanctions, for example, on our energy, on our oil and gas. The idea will be that the oligarchs who are profiting from oil and gas will suffer. But in truth, those people have corrupted an enormous amount of money, and the losses that they are experiencing from sanctions are probably incomparable with the amounts that they actually own. And meanwhile, the prices for heating that not apparently available in many other regions in Russia are rising, and people have to pay more. And in fact, the European attempt to reduce the profits of oligarchs means that Russians are just paying them more than they used to. So it is very, very complicated to make sanctions that work in exactly the way that you want them to. It is very difficult to find a pressure point to figure out what exactly would punish those people. I think the answer really is that sanctions couldn't. But I, at the same time, don't think that's a cause for removing all of them.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
So I also wanted to talk about the academic community, because that's an interesting conversation. You may be aware that in 21 or 22 already, Russia removed its universities from the what's it called, Bolognian system, the international recognized system. That means that if you had an undergraduate in Russia, you cannot use it to apply for a master's abroad. You have to apply for an undergraduate as a person without higher education. That of course makes it very difficult for students who share oppositional beliefs and are trying to find a way to immigrate. Work visas and student visas are typically the easiest way to immigrate into a different country. Work visas are hard to find if you are not present in the country, because you need to go to interviews, you need to make yourself present, you need to make yourself readily available. And also work visas are paid by the business who employs disincentive to hire people who come from abroad, especially from Russia. So student visas are a good option, but people can't apply to universities under the current system. At the same time, whether on the subject of whether universities in Russia are tools for propaganda or not, I think that 5 or even 3 years ago, I will be certain that there are universities that maintain neutrality and maintain an audience of students who are oppositional and who can display their views, at least within their university community. In 2021, some of my friends were graduating from Moscow Higher School of Economics, and those are lovely people. Like, I had absolutely no doubt about the openness and quality of their education. But in recent times, it is much harder to be certain because we see more and more economical pressures on the universities. We see more and more bans. We see that professors are being filtered. The content of the lectures is being filtered. People are not allowed to say or do any particular thing, and then they can be given away to the police for even the smallest and most ambiguous statement. Students are regularly forced to participate in pro-governmental demonstrations. Students are either encouraged by money or, in fact, threatened with expulsion and reduction of their grades if they don't participate in those events. And you can see videos of things like that happening all the time. There's a huge concert going on that the government has paid a lot of money for. There's beautiful lighting, everything's exploding, people are singing, and the audience is just frozen still because they do not want to be there. The only reason they are there is because they were forced to be there. So within this kind of system, it is really hard to say how many people maintain their oppositional standpoint. And it is hard to say how many people were convinced because there is change of personnel, there's change of program, there's change of curriculum, and people are basically taught an alternative version of history. So there are some universities for sure that are doing exceptionally well at creating the distributors of propaganda, the next generation of Russia's elite. But I can't say about the rest. The rest are struggling probably more than.
I understand. Yeah. Maybe I have one thought, because I believe from an ethical, if you go on an ethical, if we look at this lens, I believe it's cynical to punish the ordinary people if that was the aim. So if the aim is to tackle the universities or the elite, I'm totally I'm totally for this idea. But to create an unsatisfied and an unhappy population who is then going out of the street, and then they overthrow their own government, I believe this is cynical. It is a tactical approach. I understand it, and maybe it goes wrong, maybe it goes right, but I believe it's cynical from an ethical standpoint. I believe that the people, like the Iranian coup, that was almost peaceful, and they overthrow the Shah Reza Pahlavi, I believe his name was. But then, unfortunately, another dictator, Ayatollah Khomeini, showed up. So, unfortunately, history showed us that revolutions are not always successful, and many of them are not successful. So, I come from this perspective that I'm looking always from the bottom up, and I need to understand how can we change our own system. So, for example, you in Russia, I'm in Austria, my friends in Bulgaria, and my family in Bulgaria, and how we can democratize, the current democracies, which are also with many problems. We have far-right movements in Hungary, Poland, in Austria as well. We have authoritarian backlashes. We have austerity regimes. Government is more spending on military, not on social things like schools and care and so on and so forth. So, yeah, I don't understand how to tackle everything at the same time, oppose authoritarian regimes, fight our own government. It's so, yeah, it's so difficult to grasp all and to tackle at the same time, and without falling into the trap of someone will save us. Because maybe this is my critique to the Russian girl Nordic, because she said first things come first. We have to prioritize. First, we need to stop Putin. First, we need to win the war in Ukraine, and then we build up a new society. I don't buy that fully. I understand that this is a tactical approach, but I believe in the more complex way, that everybody needs to pop up in China, in India. Everybody needs to stand up and to peacefully resist the current structure and to overcome it and to democratize and to, yeah, maybe I'm naive, maybe I'm too optimistic, and I don't know, but I would wish that this would happen at the same time all over the world.
So you think it's really more realistic for all people all over the world to suddenly stand up and denounce war than a slow process of tackling one specific dictator? Like,
No, I believe that we, yeah, because there are unsatisfied people all around the world. If you look at the demonstrations that are happening in Brazil, all over the place, people are not are not agreeing. In Africa, people are exploited, in cobalt, in yeah, in gold mines, and yeah, the people in Southeast Asia, with the clothing industries, are very much oppressed, especially women's. And I believe there's so much oppression going on, and we need to stand up. We need to, especially we in the North, I believe that we should give up our privileges to a large degree. We should give up our living standard to a large degree, because it's based on imperial goods. It's based on goods that we don't have here. And I don't buy the liberal, yeah, but we trade it. And I don't buy that. I believe that this is an imperial mode of living. And yeah, but this is a difficult and another, maybe we can discuss it another day. But yeah, I see the world through this lens, so I hope that one day we all stand up.
it will be wonderful. Yeah. I don't deny that.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't have any further question. It was a wonderful talk, and I feel that you honestly showed your emotions and yeah, uneasiness also with the conference. And I love the way you described all of it, the good sides, the bad sides. And I got the feeling that you don't regret that you took part of it. I believe that you grew, that you gained a lot of experience, and I believe you get to know a lot of good people that have good intentions. And yeah, maybe we can learn from the mistakes, and maybe we can, yeah, organize and do better the next time. Fail, do better, fail better, do again. And maybe this is the way it goes. And yeah, I thank you very much for the time. And it was for me also a very touching interview. And it was very nice to have you and to share, yeah, your thoughts. And yeah, it was wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you for paying interest and for communicating those ideas. It's very good to have conversations like this. So, yeah.
Yeah, this is also a mix of scientific approach, because I maybe even if there is no that truth, I'm seeking some sort of truth, scientific truth. And so I'm, yeah, and also I'm curious. So yeah, it's the right mix. Yeah, so thank you once
Yeah.
again, and hope we stay in contact.
Yes. Yes. Stay in touch.